Hello, everybody. I'm Annie Peters. I am the Director of Research and Education at NAATP. And in concert with our intention to bring you resources for use during COVID-19 and data collection and measurement in particular, today I have with me Dr. Scott Miller, who directs the International Center for Clinical Excellence. Hello, Scott.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Thank
Good.
you for joining me. When I was thinking about what kind of resources will provider members need as we're moving through this experience of delivering addiction treatment during this difficult time, how do we know that what we're doing, particularly if we're doing telehealth, is helping people? How do we know that we're using techniques and approaches and the first thought I think of as a psychologist is, how is the person responding to me? How are they able to connect with me, feel understood by me, feel connected if I'm using telehealth? And, how can I really create an environment where the person feels comfortable in providing feedback about the relationship and about what they're going through at this time. So I thought of the session rating scale and the outcome rating scale and contacted you, and I really appreciate your time. What we just said as we were talking before we started recording is that you talk a lot about building a culture of feedback. And, right now, during a time like this, when a lot of people are using technology, is a time that we need to think about making sure we're getting people's feedback and integrating that into the care we provide.
Sure. It's, my experience so far is largely informal reports. I just interviewed Jerry Cunningham, who's a psychologist in Dublin today, and he was citing some informal research as well that indicates that people are having some challenge keeping their clients engaged via these technological platforms, whatever they might be. And so it's probably focused the need that we have always had to see if we can get feedback from our clients. Long ago, more than 2 decades ago, there was an entire movement started within the field of mental health and substance abuse called routine outcome measurement or monitoring, ROM. And we were part of that movement. We developed a couple of simple tools that could be used, one at the beginning and one at the end of each session. And their purpose was really to help the therapist stay on track with the client. And the reason to stay on track with the client is because the dropout rate in routine services is pretty high. On average throughout the United States, it's about 25%. Second key finding is that therapists think that their clients are making progress when frankly they're not making progress at times. And therapists think they know when their clients are deteriorating, not making progress. And the research literature is, I think, speaking very loudly, we do not. And the third piece was that there was a small number of people who stuck around for very long periods of time. If you're thinking of your own caseload, you probably know these people by name as well as everybody else in the agency that you work for. These people collect, they absorb a tremendous amount of time and resources, but they just don't go anywhere. And all of this really points to the need to, once again, find out, are we helping and is the client engaged with me? And because our view of those variables isn't a very reliable source, and it's not because we're bad people. You wouldn't trust your physician if they said, let me look at you and tell me what your blood pressure is. Neither should you trust your internal judgment about that. You should use some reliable scale, some valid scale that assesses progress and engagement. And at the same time, those scales have to be feasible to use in clinical practice. Clinicians are busy. Clients don't want to be bothered with any more paperwork than the system currently requires that we use. So you need some tool that takes less than 5 minutes per visit to administer and score. And if you're seeing your clients for 15 minutes, well, it even needs to be more brief than that. And you mentioned 2 of the tools. They're not the only tools that you can use, but they're free. You can get them from my website at scottdmiller.com. They're called the outcome and the session rating scales. And what you mentioned, I think, is really critical. Whether you were working virtually, as we're talking today, or you're working face-to-face, and that's to create a culture in the room that suggests to the client that they can tell you everything and anything about the work that's happening. They can tell you when they're not being helped. They can tell you when the relationship has suffered their connection with you. And that means creating this culture of feedback. And so we spend a fair bit of time helping therapists develop a pattern as they introduce the skills that invites them to be as forthcoming as possible. It really means spending some time to create that environment. So I'm telling my clients, I work a little differently than you may be accustomed to. Most of the people I've seen throughout my career have had tons and tons of treatment before. So I work a little differently, and I'm going to ask them each visit for some feedback at the beginning and at the end. I want to know, how's it been since the last visit? And I really don't want pie in the sky. I really want to know how it's been, because that will allow me to adjust and change what we do. If it's working, we keep going. If it's not working, it's super important that I know that, so that I can adjust the services to better meet your needs. And in some cases, that means I may not be the person, or this may not be the program for you. It doesn't mean anything about your ability to be helped, but maybe just whether or not I'm the right person in the process. At the end of the visit, I give people a second measure, and this is really designed to tap into how it was between us. And I tell people, I'm not interested in perfect scores. That's not what this is about. Nobody sees this except for me. This is really sort of similar to seeing your tailor. And if you're going to have a suit of clothes made specific to you, which is what psychotherapy really is, it's one of the last areas where we're trying to wrap the service around the client rather than do some cookie cutter kind of care. So for me, it doesn't make any sense to leave my office. If it pinches you a little bit or it's too tight across the chest, you just let me know. We can let it out, or you may need a whole new designer. And that's perfectly fine with me, because my commitment is that you get the care that you need and want. So I really do spend a fair bit of time trying to create an environment where clients can be open with me about their progress and engagement.
Mm-hmm. And I know I watched your webinar yesterday, and I know there was a good bit of discussion about supervision. And, I've done a good bit of clinical supervision and thinking, how can I infuse this idea into supervisees and new clinicians, that you got to find out how your client is responding to you, and how great it would be to start that with them as they start their careers. Hey, check in with the clients, do something like this formally, and you'll learn a ton about, you start to see trends. Oh, this is how people are reacting to me.
Clinicians say, and there have been several long-term surveys, mostly done by two researchers, Orlinsky and Runestad, and those two people looked at how therapists develop over the course of their professional careers. And supervision, I think, is number 2 on the professional development parade hit list. Supervision, they love supervision, but here's the problem: it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Yeah. Therapists feel good about themselves, they feel good about the work, and the impact on outcome is negligible. Now, I know that's hard to believe, but that's what the data say. So what you say, I think, is really critical. Therapists just can't go talk to their supervisors about the cases they want. They have to talk with their supervisor about the cases that the measures show are not making progress. And let me just give you a hint why from the research. Our experience of therapeutic process can be very different from the client's experience. Mm-hmm. We therapists will often take to our supervisors interpersonal difficulties. Help me figure out how to motivate my client, or we had this negative interaction. What should I have done differently? Well, what happens if that interaction or that lack of motivation, as you see it, actually is resulting in the client experiencing progress? Now you've gone to a supervisor who's told you to do something different. You go back in the room and you mess up a virtuous cycle. So it's really critical to add the measures to your work so that you can take the cases that are truly not making progress, the ones that you think and that it's confirmed by the data, so that your supervisor can give you help pointed to those cases that need the help.
I know you've been talking about deliberate practice and how do people practice that, and why is that so important at all times, but particularly a time like this? Why is deliberate practice important? And
of course, I'm really glad you asked me that, because I have a brand new book on the subject, and I promise that wasn't some planned plug here.
I know we didn't plan it, I swear.
It just came up. APA, our book Better Results, coming out in May of May 26th of this year. And you're going to see a lot of yak about deliberate practice. The very first time it was mentioned ever in the history of psychological care, whether you're treating a substance abuse or mental health problems or both, was our 2007 article called Super Shrinks. You can get that article, download it for free from my website. If you just type in Super Shrinks and Scott Miller, it will pop up and you can access the article. What we were looking for was some way of understanding why certain therapists achieved reliably better outcomes than others. That's a fact, by the way, and all therapists secretly know it. But there are certain therapists that rise to the top in terms of their outcomes. And for decades, since it was first discovered by another psychologist by the name of David F. Ricks in 1974, the usual way any search to explain it was ended was, we have no idea why this is happening. It turns out that this work by a man named K. Anders Ericsson, who they call the expert on expertise, and who had been studying top performers, not in psychotherapy, but in other fields like surgery, medicine, mathematics, history, computer programming, found that the key variables, or one of the key variables that accounted for top performance, was how much time they spent in this activity, now called deliberate practice. And deliberate practice is really about getting to your performance edge, pushing to where your usual work falls apart. So in order to deliberately practice, you have to identify your shortcomings. One way to do that is, as we've already talked about, begin to measure your results. By measuring your results, you can then begin to parse the data and look for, where are you weaker and with whom are you weaker? Maybe it's with clients who have a substance abuse disorder and are also anxious. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's with clients who are hostile and angry. That's never an easy group of people to connect with emotionally. You highlight those particular areas from your data set, and then you're probably going to need to do a little bit of search of the literature and engage in some exercise designed to work that weak muscle in your clinical practice. That's what deliberate practice is.
Yeah, and people may be finding that, as they start measuring themselves, that a weak area is telehealth, that I don't do as well when the person isn't actually sitting in front of me. And how do I get better at that? So in what areas am I not connecting and not doing great work with people?
And that it's a lovely, I think, connection to the challenge that all of us are facing today. Of course, there will be some naturals, people who just have a video presence that is different from the rest of us. So if you find out that, in fact, your outcomes are X with face-to-face work, but they're X minus 1 when you suddenly move to video, might be an area where you need to work. And it's probably going to be a good idea to get some help, get a coach, somebody who's an expertise. Of course, everybody is a Zoom therapist now. That doesn't mean we're all Zooming to better outcomes in the process, but there are people who've really mastered this medium. And oftentimes, if you find out, now remember, this isn't just about going to a training on Zoom in general. This is about first finding out, are my outcomes suffering? Do I lack connection? Do I seem to have a higher dropout rate with people when I'm using this medium? Once I identify that, then I might want to reach out to a coach, have them look at a couple of the Zoom pieces, do Zoom sessions, or talk it through with them and see if they can't give me some ideas for exercises.
Right. And the research is too that measuring the feedback improves outcomes.
It's surprising to me how little people know that. And I think, unfortunately, the regulators got to us before the research did. So since Joint Commission and other groups have said we all have to include an outcome measure if you're going to be certified, while that's a good idea, I think it really misses the point. I don't do things because they demand that I do them. I want to do them because they're going to help the people I work with. Heaven knows I didn't get in this field for the money. So there's got to be some reason that I'm here. And it gives me such joy, as I'm sure it does you and the people that are listening, to have a client say, you've made a difference in my life. Here's what we know when you use the measures. We know that over time, therapist outcomes, the clients of the therapists who are using the measures are 2.5 times more likely to achieve a reliable improvement in their well-being and functioning. So it's pretty amazing when you think about it.
That's pretty great. Yeah. And I know you've been getting this question a lot, but just because we're providing resources and access, your measures can be accessed online. And if what we're talking about here piques your interest and you're not already using feedback-informed treatment of some kind, getting a training, of course, in infusing that into your practice as a whole is important. And these are available online through various media. And in fact, I talked to My Outcomes, and they were offering kind of a special offer, and that's in our information on our page. So yeah, I know you've been getting asked that a lot. Well, give me the measures.
And you can get them for free on my website. You just look for Fit Measures Licensing on my homepage at scottdmiller.com. You do have to agree to the licensing terms. There's no digital use outside of the authorized feedback systems. We also put our manuals on at half price. So if you're looking for an introduction to how can I get started, I think the manuals right now are $30 or something like that. So I don't think that stands in the way of most, but you send me an email, and if you are really struggling right now to make ends meet, I'll send you the manuals for nothing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I know this will be really helpful to our providers, and thank you very much.
You're doing such important work, and I know that clinicians are going to be grateful for all the resources you pulled together.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.